He's the leader of that organization and movement. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Noel Castellanos.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Jack. So I want to jump in and just tell you a little bit about myself, and then tackle maybe a couple of the issues that were brought up that I think will be a good framework for our conversation today. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I am, depending on how you want to frame this, I'm at least a third generation Mexican American. As far as I know, my grandparents have been in the United States for they came many years ago when I was when I was born, and as I was growing up, my grandparents and every one of their brothers and sisters were already living in Texas. My parents were born in a little border town called Weslaco, Texas, right next to Brownsville, McAllen, down in the valley. One of my grandmothers was also born there, okay? And then I was born there in that little town and grew up. My parents were migrant workers along with all of their brothers and sisters. 18 children on my mom's side and 12 on my dad's side. So I am probably related to almost every Mexican American in Texas, almost. It's a good chance. And so we have a big family there. But I think the important thing I want to emphasize as I tell my story is that we've been here a long, long time. And back then, some of the earliest memories I have is walking across the border very freely. We would just go and buy groceries or buy spices or whatever, but it was a regular thing to have people coming and going between the U.S. and Mexico. And a couple things happened to me, and that I think is important as I tell the rest of the story related to why I'm involved in this immigration issue, and then some of the things that we face today. For me, it was a very dramatic and strong religious experience, a conversion to a faith in Jesus Christ that got me to say, man, what am I going to really do with my life? And one of the things that I remember hearing that made me very open to this personality, okay, was the idea that Christ came to affirm the dignity of every human being on this planet, and that he actually came to do that by laying down his life so that we might enter into a relationship with God through his death on the cross. Okay, you all have, that's the Christian story. Well, for me, what that meant is that, boy, if God did that for me, then I have a great responsibility. I've got to use my life for something good. So what that meant for me is that I made a very conscious choice to say, I'm not going to go and just kind of go out there and try to be rich and make all kinds of money and do whatever I want to do. I felt a call to go back and work in the Hispanic community. Okay, so that was a turning point for me. Right out of college, I went to the Mission District of San Francisco, began to work with Central American immigrants, who many of them were coming from El Salvador fleeing the war, and that was a whole new experience for me. Because again, I grew up here, I was a U.S. citizen and dealing with that reality. And then I moved into a Mexican community or barrio in San Jose not too long after that, where Cesar Chavez was organizing farm workers and beginning to bring to the national stage the plight of the migrant worker in this country. All these folks that were responsible for putting food on the plates of most Americans, but yet because of pesticides, because of low wages and all of that, and because of lack of organization, all of a sudden here comes this very humble yet powerful leader who begins to create a union and begins organizing. Well, I lived in this little neighborhood where Cesar Chavez lived called Sal Si Puedes, okay? Get Out If You Can is the name of the neighborhood. And for me, it was, I'm going to live there among the people and get to know them, begin to build relationships with them and friendships with them. And then because of my own particular mission, it was I'm going to help them grow closer to God. But very quickly, I realized that that process took me way beyond the idea of just getting them into a church or getting them into a Bible study or feeling satisfied thinking that my goal is really just to get people to ascend to a certain way of belief, okay? For me, when I was in the middle of that human suffering, which was not far away from my own reality, I said, man, there's something not right here. Kids are not graduating from high school. Parents don't have adequate jobs. We're living in these barrios, these communities where the police are not responding. They don't come. Gang violence everywhere. So all of that was kind of my, my next step into trying to live out this faith. And then 21 years ago, my family and I, wife and 2 children at that point, we moved into a Mexican community in Chicago called Little Village or La Villita. And again, the call was, we feel like we can go there and just live there among the people and really see if we can serve to be a catalyst where folks can really learn to not only love God, but to also understand how valuable they are, okay? As immigrants in this country, this neighborhood, about 100% almost Mexican descent. And here's what I found out, and this is what launches us into this immigration talk, is that while I was there loving and helping people, my goal was to educate their kids, making sure that folks were able to buy homes because that creates stability in the community. While we were working on starting health clinics and youth programs and job kind of incubation opportunities, over and over and over and over again, I heard, you know what, I can't do that because I'm here illegally. I don't have my papers. I don't have my documents. And I thought, well, let's just go get them, And I think that's one of the big myths that I think many people are surprised at as we enter into this discussion, is that for mostly unskilled workers that come to this country who flee not just Latin America, although the perception is that all undocumented immigrants are from Mexico, but while the majority come from Latin America because of its close proximity, it's Asia and it's Russia. In Chicago, where I live, here's on one road, one main street, here's what I can experience in a day. I can be at Home Depot in my neighborhood, and there's a bunch of day laborers, most of them who are undocumented, right, waiting for somebody to come and take them to do a job where they'll pay them just a little bit of money. And if I keep going north about 7 miles, there is another little gas station there, and the same thing is going on, but it's Russian and Polish and Czech immigrants that are there doing the same thing that you never hear about at all. Chicago is one of the most diverse ethnic cities in the country, and we have undocumented immigrants from most places in the world in that country. But, as I kept hearing that story, I had to ask myself, well, maybe if I just work harder at being, nice to these folks, I can help them solve this problem. Or maybe if I just start more programs and I'm more creative about how to do that, I'll help them solve these problems. Maybe if I get more of these kids into college and get them educated, they'll come out and they'll be on their way. But on every single turn, I kept facing the same thing. Folks would say, you know what? Because of our legal status or lack thereof, we run into dead ends at every turn. And that's when I began to examine the U.S. immigration policy. And what I found is that our policy is antiquated, it's broken, it has not really changed for probably 50 or more years. We've had a policy that has not been revamped to take into account the new realities that we face today. Many of you know that in 1986, 87, President Reagan dealing with a very similar situation as what we have right now, many undocumented immigrants in our country. He actually passed the amnesty law that allowed people to come out of the shadows of being undocumented and actually register and become legal residents. And that, for many of them, was the pathway to then become citizens. But since 1987 till today, what we did is basically fix the problem for 3 million people back then, but did nothing to really prevent this from happening again. And so today we have, by many estimates, between 12 and 15 million undocumented individuals in the United States of America. And so what are some of the factors that are going on today? Okay, well, I think two things that you all probably could guess very quickly have greatly impacted where we are today with the prospect of changing our immigration law. Number one, during the period right before 9/11, President Bush and President Fox of Mexico were on the verge of passing some very huge, sweeping immigration reform laws. They were both friends from when they were both governors, Guanajuato in Mexico and Texas on the border. And so they'd gotten to know each other. They like Perry today, seems to have a little more clue or a little more compassion if you listen to the debate, right, towards immigrants because of being right there on the border. Well, they were on the verge of passing this big reform that was going to do a number of things that has kind of been at the heart of a lot of the immigration debate for the last 10 years at least. Okay, they were saying, we got to create a pathway to citizenship for folks that are here illegally. We know that there are a bunch of folks here, and we're going to admit that they broke the law to get into this country, so we've got to penalize them, give them, make them pay a fine. Great concern about this idea of assimilation or integration. So they said we've got to make sure that they learn the Constitution, that they learn to speak English. Okay, so we got to do that. The other thing, we got to close the border, right? We got to make sure that the border's closed, and we can't have this porous border. Thirdly, we've got to create a guest worker program that takes into account the real needs of our country's labor needs and the number of immigrant visas that come. Because one of the things that you begin to find when you dig into this thing is today in our national policy, there are 10,000 visas for unskilled laborers to come into the United States besides agriculture. Okay, agriculture has a few more, but imagine, out of those 15 million that are here undocumented, how many people are coming to take a job at a hotel, to be a gardener, to work, in construction, doing all this kind of work, and most of them are low-wage, unskilled jobs. Well, our policy is very inadequate for that. So, we've got to figure out this guest worker kind of approach. There's got to be some kind of way to verify, okay, whether a person is here legally or not. So now that's kind of evolved to is this E-Verify program that some people want to push right now and say that's the solution today. But those are all kind of things that have been kind of brought out as essential to trying to fix our problem. And so that 9/11 situation, what happened in 9/11 put the halt on that whole discussion. Because even though we had a bipartisan bill, the McCain-Kennedy bill, that was, I think, very strongly supported on both sides of the aisle. 9/11 comes, and all of a sudden, which one of those proposals or those focuses became the primary thing that we were going to focus on? It was close the border, right? Because obviously great fear for folks coming in who might be terrorists. And so all of a sudden, and this has been since then, the discussion whenever we talk about getting anything done on immigration reform is, well, first we've got to close the border. Well, the reality is that over this period of time, we have spent billions of dollars to work to close the border, hiring more border patrol, building more fence along those high entry areas. And also, one of the things that many people don't realize is that under the Obama administration, there's been more deportations in the last couple of years than we've had during anybody else's presidency, okay? So Obama has taken that to heart, and there is a great push towards securing the border. So one factor that I think I'll mention that it's really important as we think about some of the complexity of this issue. There was a time when migrant workers or immigrants who would come into the country, they would have a pattern of what we call circular migration, okay? They would come in to pick a crop, or they'd come in to do construction work for a season, or they would come to do some type of work, and then they would go back home, and they'd come back again when the work was available again. And all this was going on while we had on the books our current immigration policy, okay? So the policy hadn't changed. But there was a kind of a flow and a allowance and a system that we had kind of gotten into where folks were coming and going, and it was working for everybody. During that time, there was also great economic boom. Everybody was making money, and in some of the places that today are some of the harshest opponents to immigration, Georgia and Alabama and Arizona, California. It was immigrants that fueled growth in construction industries, in entertainment industries, in agriculture. So somehow all of that was going on, and when the border became tight, that migration pattern came to a halt, because now what happened? You're in the United States and you had a job, and you were not going to leave. It was too difficult to leave. And the last thing I think I'd say on that is, and then our current economic crash happened, okay? And when you think about the incredible toll that that's taken on our country, all of a sudden, with the economy just falling out and recession talk and everything else, more and more, here's what you began to hear. And I would hear this everywhere I go, and I still hear it today. Like Jim said, I was just in Alabama for a few days. They just got done passing one of the harshest, it will be the harshest anti-immigration law in the country, worse than Arizona. And one of the first things that I hear as I'm there is, hey, there is no way that we're going to support any kind of immigration policy that does not get rid of these immigrants that are taking away jobs from Americans, okay? So I leave that meeting, and I travel 35 miles outside of Huntsville, Alabama, which is a mecca for high-tech and defense spending jobs, and Boeing and all kinds of other companies are there. And I go out to the little towns where most of the Hispanics live, Tyson Chicken Factory, tomato farms and all, and I began talking to people, and I talked to a few of the employers, and they say, you know what, even though the law has not come into effect yet, our folks, our workers are leaving. They're afraid. They're taking off. We don't have enough workers to finish our shifts in these poultry plants. We don't have enough workers to pick these tomatoes and these crops. Many of them are going to go bad. There are not any American workers that will take these jobs. Is there a need for work today by millions of people? Absolutely. But the one of the myths is that, you know what, these immigrants are coming in and taking jobs that if they weren't here, our folks would be working. And, it doesn't mean that there's not an impact, because I do believe there is an impact. But I think that we underestimate how true that is, that many of these jobs are jobs that nobody else is going to take. So that whole thing, is the way I would frame what's been going on over the last, 20, 30 years in our immigration system today. We're in this political climate where nobody wants to take the lead. No one wants to make this a huge priority. And so we continue to have many, many families that are in a place of I would just call it limbo, okay? So, in closing, my motivation, okay, is really I believe that the United States is a place that was created for opportunity, and I believe there's great benefit from immigrants coming to this country, but even more than that, I think what has made me become extremely passionate about being involved in this situation is that I see that as a minister of the gospel, that the idea that we would not treat people with dignity and respect, now that doesn't necessarily equate having a certain kind of immigration policy, okay? But it does say that we cannot just be at a place where we say, hey, we don't really care what happens to these families. We don't care how they got here. We don't care if we were complicit in some way in allowing these millions of people to come in as we turned our heads away from those that were coming in illegally because it was to our benefit. Now we have these families trapped in this situation, and I believe that it's going to take a great deal of just kind of a shift in paradigm, a shift in thinking, and a willingness to put the needs of some of these families ahead of politics. And I don't know how that's going to happen, but there's a great movement stirring in the Christian church today that is pushing us to begin to say we've got to really push for this kind of change. So I am just here telling you that my probably what keeps me going every day is I am out on the road. I live in a neighborhood where I see people impacted by this policy every single day, and folks are negatively impacted. And the DREAM Act is one of the topics that you read about, right? Think about that. A kid is brought here to this country, and but like me, by the time they get to high school, they don't speak any Spanish. They don't have any relatives back home anywhere where their parents came from. But now the idea is, let's send these kids out of here. Let's send them home. And I think what a waste. Because to a kid that I've talked to, they've gone through high school, they're ready to go to college, many of them are ready to serve in the military and do something good for our country, but they just don't have any options. And so that's one of the very practical ways that I think that we could take a first step to say, let's address this immigration policy in this way. So, Jim, yeah.
So you talked about when talking about Romans 12 and 13, just talking about the role that the government has played, like in the past, in sort of implicitly permitting or encouraging people to come here. What do you think the role of the church should be to these new sort of immigration laws that are being passed in places like Alabama and Arizona? Should it be sort of a willful disobedience or like a new sanctuary movement? Should it be sort of a accepting of it until like you can go through legal channels? What should the church's response to those new laws be?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question, and that's precisely why I was in Alabama, to talk to Christian leaders and to begin having this dialogue. One of the things that I would say that is understandable is that when the federal government fails to act and pass immigration reform, it does leave the door open for states to begin taking their own action like this, and that's the trend now that we're seeing. My goal is to like here's some of the portions of the Alabama law that came out. Okay, all right, you can't if you give somebody a job, that's a criminal offense. Okay, if somebody's here illegally, it's a criminal offense. I mean, those are the things that we've known. A child goes to enroll in school. and some of these kids were born here, right? So they are U.S. citizens, but you cannot enroll in school if the answer to the second question is, were your parents born in this country? So again, here, children who are born in the United States are now at the kind of subject to that type of situation. If you help an immigrant in any way, you give them a ride, you knowingly assist them in this or that. If you rent to an immigrant, okay, if you rent an apartment to somebody who's undocumented, you can also be written up. So, like, again, I'm there, I was born here and all, but all of that says to me, and this has been the fear, okay, in Arizona and many places, is the racial profiling that really will begin to happen. So it's beginning to bring up some of these issues, but then asking the church, is there any part of this law that you think we need to confront? Okay, what the Catholic Church and some of the mainline churches began to do in Arizona, they said, you know what, we're not going to stay silent when you tell me that if I see a person who's undocumented and I help them, that's illegal. We're going to do it. You know, we're going to do this as a Christian response. So in that sense, folks have already begun to say that kind of thing. Now, in Alabama, I don't think anybody's talking about sanctuary, but I think, to me, it's a question of beginning to at least have dialogue, and very few Christians are even engaged in the process of dialogue about these laws.
What do you say to opponents of the DREAM Act who cite their in opposition the stipulation we're not going to penalize states who provide in-state tuition to children of illegal immigrants? I mean, we live in a time where state governments are really strapped for cash, and how some might be angry or opposed to this concept of providing limited resources to children of illegal immigrants.
Yeah, I think I saw in USA Today this morning that 12 states have taken on a kind of a state DREAM Act kind of a position where they do some variation of that. Well, I think it's a smart move on states' parts, because I think they're investing in. I mean, think about you have kids that are really motivated to do well, and these kids are going to probably stay in those states and work and contribute and pay taxes, and they're not kids that are going to be delinquent. They're not kids that are going to be causing trouble. I mean, if anything, you're going to have the most grateful residents. And if they ever become citizens, then citizens. But I think it's short-sighted because again, like, here's what happened in Illinois. The in-state tuition was allowed, but then there was a private group that included the governor that committed to raising scholarship money from private sources, not from public money. So, there's been that kind of commitment from a lot of states, which I think really has been pretty amazing. And I just think it's a recognition of the great potential that's there.